In the news tonight, mourners in Gaza attend a funeral procession for a Palestinian boy and his sister, aged 10 and 6, killed when they were hit by fragments from a missile fired by an Israeli aircraft. The Syrian government rules out any discussion of presidential elections at peace talks in Geneva, drawing accusations from the opposition it is halting the talks before they started. And U.S. Republican presidential front Donald Trump says protesters that shut down his Chicago rally were planned attacks, and his rivals denounce his chaotic rally as crucial contests near. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Mourners in Gaza attended a funeral procession for a Palestinian boy and his sister, aged 10 and 6, who were killed in the enclave when they were hit by fragments from a missile fired by an Israeli aircraft. Residents of Beit Lahia in the northern Gaza Strip said 10-year-old Yassin Abu Ghousa died after debris from the explosion hit his home, which is situated next to one of the training camps. His 6-year-old sister Isra, who was seriously wounded, later died in hospital. An Israeli military statement said aircraft had targeted 4 training camps belonging to Hamas after 4 missiles landed in open areas in southern Israel last night. No casualties were reported from the rocket strikes. Gaza rocket fire has tapered off significantly since the 2014 war, when Israeli attacks killed more than 2,100 Palestinians, mostly civilians. The Syrian government said that peace talks due to start next week will not be allowed to include any discussion on presidential elections. Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim, speaking at a news conference in Damascus, confirmed his government's participation in UN-led talks, but said the talks would fail if the opposition thought Geneva would give them power that they failed to take in battle. He criticized UN envoy Staffan de Mistura for presenting an agenda for the talks and saying presidential elections would take place in 18 months' time. Muallim indicated that a national unity government is the most his government would be willing to discuss. His statement drew accusations from the opposition that the Syrian government is halting the talks before they started. Muallim also said the government delegation would travel to Geneva on Sunday, but would return to Damascus within 24 hours if the other side did not show up.
Neither he nor anybody else has the right to talk about presidential elections. The elections are an exclusive right for the Syrian people. So what de Mistura said opposes all UN documents that the dialogue which is to happen is based on. I repeat, this thing is only the Syrian people's property. We will no longer accept any departure away from objectivity on the UN side in order to please this side or that, and our delegation will refuse any attempt to put the issue of presidential elections on the agenda.
The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said a rebel group shot down a fighter plane over the Syrian province of Hama. According to the observatory, the rebels brought down the jet by firing 2 heat-seeking missiles, adding the plane was most probably Syrian. But a rebel group operating in the area, Jaish al-Nasr, said it had brought down the jet with anti-aircraft guns. There was no comment from the Syrian military. The pilot, who was seen parachuting to the ground, is said to have been rescued by the Syrian army. Since the Syria crisis broke out, millions left the country to seek refuge elsewhere. But one college student of French literature in Hims University opted to stay and record with his camera the conflict. 22-year-old Ja'far Mir'i is a native of Hims, where 70% of the buildings in the city are estimated to have become ruins since the war broke out almost 6 years ago. Unfortunately, the war forced Ja'far to suspend his studies, but instead he turned into a photographer, using his pictures to convey a message to the world of hope and peace. He became popular after his photos of a bride and a Syrian army soldier groom in front of ruins of the city that went viral. Besides photographing, Ja'far and a group of his friends started drawing paintings on buildings riddled with bullet holes to commemorate their compatriots killed in the war and cheer up for the war-stricken hymns.
I wish to display hope and show the whole world that we can seek happiness in the ruins, because with every destruction there is still hope and happiness. We lost around 13,000 lives in this region. We are trying to show the whole world that the blood of these martyrs is not cheap. The blood of the martyrs is the holes, and I draw a flower around every hole that represents a martyr.
Iraq's Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr called for a sit-in at the gates of Baghdad's heavily fortified Green Zone, housing the government offices, in a bid to step up pressure on Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi to deliver on promised anti-corruption reforms. In a statement posted online, Sadr invited every pro-reform Iraqi to rise up to begin a new phase, saying the protests would take place on Friday. A year and a half into his 4-year term, Abadi is trying to challenge the system which has paralyzed politics and allowed corruption to flourish. But in addition to pressure from Sadr, he faces resistance from the country's powerful political factions that don't want their influence reduced. Sadr's party, Al-Ahrar, accounts for 34 of the parliament's 328 members and may not be able to vote down Abadi should the other parties approve a new cabinet that he said he will form. Troops loyal to the Yemeni president have captured the western entrance to the strategic city of Taiz, partially breaking a siege by Houthi fighters. Medical and military sources said at least 48 people have been killed in heavy clashes in Yemen's third biggest city, and at least 120 people have been wounded. Yemeni Vice President and Prime Minister Khaled told a news conference in Aden that the Yemeni government is preparing an aid convoy to Taiz to leave soon, but gave no further details. told journalists the government has prepared 1,000 men to take charge of security in Taiz immediately to avoid a repetition of the lawlessness and chaos that happened in Aden after government forces captured the city from the Houthis in July last year. With a passionate defense of her migrant policy, German Chancellor Angela Merkel made one last campaign push on the eve of Super Sunday elections in 3 German states. Migration is the touchstone issue in the 3 votes, with many people worried how Germany can cope with the refugee crisis that saw over 1 million migrants arrive in the country last year. Pollsters predict her conservative Christian Democrat CDU party will lose support to the anti-immigration alternative for Germany, AfD. Already represented in 5 of Germany's 16 regional parliaments, the AfD looks set to burst into 3 more tomorrow, campaigning on slogans such as "Secure the borders," "Stop the asylum chaos." In power since 2005 and facing a federal election next year, Merkel is trying to secure a Europe-wide solution to stem the flow of refugees. Asked how she would prepare for the election results, Merkel said she will keep her fingers crossed at a rally in Baden-Württemberg.
Today, more than 90% of people are saying if someone really is fleeing from war, terror and hardship, he must get protection among us. So it's all the more important that we succeed in sending back those who are not coming from war and hardship but for economic reasons, which is understandable, but which has nothing to do with asylum or the Geneva Refugee Convention, that we tell them, you have to leave our country again.
Turkey's Coast Guard intercepted dozens of migrants at sea as they continued to attempt perilous sea crossings to Greece, despite Turkey's efforts to stem the flow under a deal with the European Union. A group of 51 people from 10 different countries, including Cuba, South Africa, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Iran, were taken to a repatriation center after being ushered to safety. Ankara struck a draft deal with the EU last week, in which it agreed to take back irregular migrants in exchange for more funding, the quick introduction of visa-free travel for Turks, and a speeding up of long-stalled EU membership talks. European and Turkish leaders hope the deal will discourage illegal migrants and kill off the business of human smugglers. Greece, meanwhile, stepped up efforts to move thousands of migrants stranded near the border with Macedonia to sheltered camps as spread of infections became a concern with two people diagnosed with hepatitis A. Greek authorities handed out leaflets in the northern border town of Idomeni, informing the migrants and refugees that the main passage to northern Europe is shut. It urged them to move to buildings and hospitality centers across the country. In the last 24 hours, an additional 629 people arrived on Greek islands from Turkey, with the total number of migrants and refugees stuck in the country reaching about 41,000, according to government data. U.S. Republican presidential front-runner Donald Trump blamed organized thugs for protests that shut down his Chicago rally and posted on his Twitter account that the incident had energized America. Trump canceled the Chicago event yesterday after it turned chaotic, having drawn support as well as criticism for his calls to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border and to impose a temporary ban on Muslims entering the country. The cancellation followed an appearance by Trump in St. Louis, during which more protests forced him to halt his speech repeatedly. Presidential candidates Bernie Sanders and John Kasich weighed in on the events in Chicago to their cheering supporters.
This campaign is bringing our people together. Not letting Donald Trump or anybody else divide us up. No, we are not going to hate Mexicans. We're not going to hate Muslims. We're not going to insult women. We're not going to insult veterans. We're not going to insult African Americans. We are going to bring our people together.
Donald Trump has created a toxic environment. And a toxic environment has allowed his supporters and those who sometimes seek confrontation to come together in violence. There is no place for this. There is no place for a national leader to prey on the fears of people who live in our great country.
Nearly 1,000 guests, led by U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama and representatives from 9 former White House families, gathered for a memorial tribute to Nancy Reagan at her late husband's presidential library in Southern California. A military honor guard carried her flower-bedecked wooden casket to the front of a large white tent where Michelle Obama, former President George W. Bush and his wife Laura, former First Ladies Jimmy Carter's wife Rosalind and Hillary Clinton were seated. Also attending the funeral were 2 of the Reagan's children, along with Caroline Kennedy, daughter of the late President John F. Kennedy. The service was punctuated by eulogies by former Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, Reagan's former White House Chief of Staff James Baker, and journalist Tom Brokaw. The services for the one-time Hollywood actress and First Lady capped 2 days during which thousands of mourners filed past her coffin as it lay in repose at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. She was buried beside her husband.
It's no secret that
Viral sensation Virginia McLaurin, known as Grandma Virginia, turned 107 today and is being celebrated by her community and honored by the White House. Grandma Virginia has been awarded the Presidential Medal of Honor for her years of volunteering. McLaurin's video released by the White House last month, dancing with the Obamas during a Black History Month event, made her a viral sensation. Virginia said she had long dreamt of visiting the White House and thought she would never live to do that.
I want to be like you when I grow up.
She's dancing? Come on. Oh, so what's the secret to still dancing at 106? Huh?
Giddy up. Just keep moving. Yeah.
Come on.
We're so happy to have you here. And look at those nails.
Nails are all done.
Barcelona remain top of La Liga with 75 points after thrashing Getafe 6-0. An own goal by Getafe defender Juan Dominguez put Barca on their way to victory after 8 minutes. A goal from Munir, 2 from Neymar, and 2 more from Messi and Turan put Luis Enrique's side in the midst of a record of 37 matches without defeat in all competitions, and the victory over Getafe matched the 12 straight league wins they achieved in 2012-2013 under coach Tito Villanova. Barca are now 11 points clear of nearest challengers Atletico Madrid, who are now playing Deportivo La Coruna. Real Madrid are in 3rd place and will face Las Palmas tomorrow. Former Real Madrid coach Rafael Benitez started as Newcastle United manager with 10 games to prevent the Magpies being relegated from Premier League. The former Liverpool and Chelsea manager has taken over from Steve McLaren and has signed a 3-year contract with the club. Benitez will be immediately thrust into action at league leaders Leicester City on Monday and has just 10 matches remaining to secure Newcastle's Premier League survival. Speaking to reporters, Benitez said he believed Newcastle had quality players and fantastic fans, adding that the club was good enough to remain in the league. Newcastle are second from bottom in the table, having lost 3 successive games and 5 of the last 6, with the possibility of a return to the 2nd tier for the first time since 2010.
So that is part of the
And finally, fair conditions with partly cloudy skies continue for the rest of tonight, with possible rain in the southern regions accompanied by light variable winds. Tomorrow it will be warm with southwesterly high winds, raining dust on most regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a relatively hot day with a high of 29 degrees Celsius, while winds will be northerly moderate to brisk and the seas slightly high. Here now to look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. Mourners in Gaza attend a funeral procession for a Palestinian boy and his sister, aged 10 and 6, killed when they were hit by fragments from a missile fired by an Israeli aircraft. The Syrian government rules out any discussion of presidential elections at peace talks in Geneva, drawing accusations from the opposition it is halting the talks before they started. And U.S. Republican presidential front-runner Donald Trump says protests that shut down his Chicago rally were planned attacks, and his rivals denounce his chaotic rally as crucial contests near. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Ali Tapan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.